If you sometimes find English words confusing, by the end of the lesson, I promise you, there will be no more confusion, because I am going to teach you over 50 different words and phrases, talk about why they are commonly confused, give you a variety of examples, and ultimately this is going to improve your overall fluency. So let's begin with some super confusing words, and because it's a nice day, let's go outside for this part of the lesson. English is full of confusing words, like these first two words that I have for you, between and among. They're both prepositions, but you're going to use between when you're talking about, well, two things or two people. There's a one-on-one relationship. Use among when you're talking about, well, more than two, and it's not really distinct. So I could say, the information in this lesson, let's keep that between you and me. I'm talking about a one-on-one relationship between you and me. Or there's an idiom that is between a rock and a hard place. This is talking about a difficult situation. A rock, a hard place, you're between it. It's not a good place to be. It's a difficult situation. Now with among, I know I told you to keep this information between you and me, but I'd rather you share it among all of your friends. So in that case, I'm talking about that group. And you may also hear people use amongst instead of among, and they mean the same thing. I think it's more common to use among, especially in the United States. Amongst, it's a little bit of an older word, but there are still some phrases, statements, in which people are likely to use amongst. If you are in front of a group of people, and maybe you're talking to them and you have to leave the room, you could say, talk amongst yourselves. That is a statement that you may hear in which people may use amongst. Now, between you and me, if you truly want to build your vocabulary, learn the difference between these confusing words, I suggest you subscribe, turn on notifications so that you learn about future lessons and I can become your English teacher. My name is Wes. The channel, Interactive English, that's what it's all about, trying to help you improve and reach your fluency goals. The next two confusing words that I have for you, reluctant and reticent. They're both adjectives, but you're going to use reluctant to refer to something that maybe you are hesitant to do or you're unwilling to do this thing. Use reticent when you're really talking about somebody's manner, that they're shy or reserved. So in that case, I think it's more common that you're going to hear people use reluctant when talking about things they're unwilling to do in general. Reticent, it's going to allow you to be more specific. So maybe if we're talking about somebody shy to speak and they don't want to speak, they're reluctant to speak, then you could describe them as being a bit reticent because we know that they're a little shy. If I were talking about maybe a team that had to do a presentation and I could say, well, she was reluctant to put together the presentation. She was unwilling to do it, maybe it was very difficult, but then he was reticent to give the presentation. So in that case, I'm talking about, well, his willingness to speak. He was reticent, he was shy, he didn't really want to do it. Here are another couple of confusing words, achieve and accomplish, and these are great words to know. So you're going to use achieve when talking about, well, you want to succeed in something. If you use accomplish, then that means, well, you've finished something, often successfully. So if I were to say, like, I want to achieve my goal, it means that I want to reach this point and I want to do it successfully. That's a little different than if I say I accomplished my goal. Well, then it's finished and, well, perhaps I was successful. Think of it this way. I always talk about trying to achieve English fluency, that you want to be successful in learning English. And it's not something that you're probably ever going to finish. So in that case, I'm not going to use accomplish. But if I'm talking about like a mission or a task, well, then I could say that I want to accomplish this mission, or maybe I already accomplished this mission. It's done, it's complete, and I did did what I needed to do. Then we have customers and clients. So customers refer to people who are buying a product or service, and clients refer to people who need some type of professional support or help from another person or a company. So I am going to tell you, I'm going to give you a situation, talking about some people, and I want you to think whether I'm talking about customers or clients. I'll give you a moment and then I'll tell you the answer. So if I am talking about, well, shopping at the mall, those are customers. If I need to hire a lawyer and I need to use their services, then I am the client. If a company uses services from another company, then they would be, this is a little tricky because they could be either clients or customers. So in some instances, they may be used interchangeably. It really just depends on the relationship, maybe between these companies, but that's another reason why they can be a bit confusing. And finally, if I were to talk about, well, people at a restaurant, those are customers. Yes, those are customers. Here are another couple of confusing words, figuratively and literally. They're adverbs. We use figuratively to refer to, well, using words or phrases in an imaginative way, talking about something that is not realistic. You would use literally to talk about something that, well, is realistic, something that happened. So there's a phrase that people might use with figuratively, and they may say, figuratively speaking, at the beginning of their statement, and then go on to say something that is not realistic. Figuratively speaking, people were kicking down the doors to buy the new iPhone. So it's not realistic, it's just an example, and people would do this really kind of to emphasize their statement. If I want to use literally, and this does happen, maybe you're talking with a friend about another friend, and that person shows up and you say, hey, we were literally just talking about you. So this was realistic. It happened. The reason why these words may be confusing is because people use literally instead of figuratively. And I know that may seem a little strange because their meaning it's pretty much the opposite. And there are people who say this is incorrect, this should not happen, but you should be aware that this is something that occurs in spoken English. Somebody might say something like, I literally have not slept in weeks. Of course that's not true, it's not realistic, but they may use literally just to try and emphasize the fact that they have not been sleeping at all. Or I could say people have literally been kicking down the doors to buy the new iPhone. So once again, I'm talking about something that's not realistic, but I'm using literally instead of figuratively. This is something that happens quite often in spoken English, and I'm even guilty of doing this from time to time. Then we have these confusing abbreviations, e.g. versus i.e. And it's something that people will often confuse in writing. They may even confuse it in spoken English if people say these abbreviations, but you're going to use e.g. in order to mean for example. You're going to use i.e. It's like saying that is to say, or it's even interchangeable with specifically. So let me try to make it a little easier for you to understand. If I were to say something like, I've been trying to eat more foods that are high in protein, e.g. tuna, broccoli, chicken. I'm really just giving an example of some of the things that I'm eating. If I were to say, well, the hotels downtown, they raise their price during the high season, i.e. May to August. Now I'm specifically talking about that time period, May to August. Let me give you a couple of statements and you tell me if we should use e.g. or i.e. If I were to say, the restaurant is closed once a week, on Mondays. All right, in that case, you should use i.e. because we're talking specifically about Mondays. How about, there are many chores that I have to do during the week. Take out the trash, mop the floor, clean the living room. Okay, you should have said e.g. because once again, I'm giving just examples of some of the chores that I have to do. So just really keep that in mind. E.g. is used to just give some examples IE is much more specific. You are talking about something that is specifically happening or some specific information. And then we have these two confusing words, consecutive and concurrent. And I think they may be confused mostly because of, well, the spelling, and they kind of sound like they might be the same word, but they have different meanings. You're going to use consecutive to talk about, well, something that happens one after the other without interruption. And you use concurrent to talk about, well, things that are happening at the same time. So I could say that the city experienced consecutive heat waves. There was a heat wave, and once it ended, without interruption, another one started. Or if I were to use concurrent, I could say, well, the country is experiencing concurrent heat waves. That there are different heat waves happening across the country at the same time. It's concurrent. So just remember, there are two different meanings: consecutive, one after the other, without interruption. Concurrent, it means happening at the same time. Now that we're back inside, I want to talk about some phrases that can be really confusing. And I'm talking about phrasal verbs because quite often people tell me that this is one of the most challenging parts when it comes to building their vocabulary, and people often make mistakes because there are many phrasal verbs, many of them have multiple meanings, so I understand that this can cause some confusion. But right now, I want to take a look at some phrasal verbs that are especially tricky. We need to have a talk about phrasal verbs, okay? So phrasal verbs can be very confusing, they can be very annoying, but they're very important to learn because we use them quite often, especially when speaking. I want to look at some phrasal verbs that, well, these can be very confusing because their meaning is similar. Nevertheless, there are some slight differences which I want to teach you, and this is really going to help with your comprehension and your overall English fluency. So let's just go ahead and start with these two phrasal verbs right here: burn up and burn down. Now, when I first started teaching English, and I was having to learn a lot about the English language, and one of the things that I came across was just trying to show how crazy the English language could be. And somebody was asking a question, and they said, how is it possible that a house can burn down at the same time it's burning up? That just doesn't make any sense. But it's true, that can happen, because if we have this sentence and somebody says, oh my God, my house is burning down. All right, it means the same thing, and somebody could say, oh my God, my house is burning up. So both of these phrasal verbs mean that something is destroyed by fire. And in the example that I just gave you, you could use either phrasal verb. You could say, my house is burning down, or my house is burning up. Either one of them, it's okay, they mean the same thing. But there is a slight difference between these two phrasal verbs, because if you say that something is burning down, what that makes me think of is some type of structure, like a home or a building or a bridge. And when it burns down, that structure is just destroyed, and often it may just collapse. If we're talking about something that burns up, it makes me think of something that is perhaps smaller, like an individual item. Not always, because you could say that a home is burning up, but I think you will typically use this with smaller individual items, paper, a book, or perhaps photo albums. Let's use that as an example. So if you have this home and your home is burning down, inside the home, maybe you have some photo albums. It's a smaller item, and if it's destroyed by the fire, then you would say, my photo albums burned up in the fire. They were destroyed by the fire, but another word that I want to give you to help you probably better understand it would be that it was consumed by this fire. I think that word may help you make a distinction between burn down and burn up. So if something burns up, it's really consumed. You could also use the phrasal verb when you get rid of energy. When you consume energy, you can burn up calories. And the other thing that I would say about burn up, I think there is a level of intensity that this is happening right in front of you. It's intense, it's really hot, it's getting hotter and hotter. And in that case, think of the same way if somebody has a fever. They might say, wow, your forehead is burning up. You're really burning up. It's intense, it's getting hot. And that is another way in which you could use this phrasal verb. So in my original example of saying that my house is burning down or my house is burning up, I think they are interchangeable. You could use either one, but I think it's because you are talking about something that is happening right at that moment. You are watching this structure getting destroyed by the fire. My house is burning down. You are watching the home getting consumed, and it's very intense. My house is burning up. If we are going to talk about this in the past, and it's already happened, I think in that case, most people would use burn down. And you could say, last year, my home burned down. All right. You're probably not going to use burn up if you're talking about something that's larger like a home. You may use it if you are looking at it at that moment and you see that the fire is consuming it. It's very intense. You could say, oh no, my house is burning up. So again, even though these phrasal verbs have a very similar meaning, there are some slight differences between the two. Now let's look at the phrasal verbs walk up and walk down. So let me give you an example. Perhaps you are looking for a restaurant and you ask somebody on the street, hey, do you know where this restaurant is? And they say, oh, it's just right over there. Just walk down the street and you'll see it. Or maybe they say, just walk up the street and you'll see it. In this case, both are correct. You can use either one because walk down and walk up, it means that you are just walking to some place. I would say that there can be some subtle differences because you can take geography into consideration. So for example, if a person is going to be walking uphill, then I'm more likely to use walk up. Just walk up the street and you'll see it. If the person's going to be walking downhill, then I'm probably going to use down. Just walk down the street and you'll see it. And if it's flat, well, then you can use either one. I would say that I think that in spoken English, people are more likely going to use walk down. Now, one way we can check this is using a great resource like Google's Ngram Viewer, which pretty much shows you how common different words and phrases are. And you can compare the two. So I can compare walk up and walk down, and when I looked it up, lo and behold, I saw that their usage is very similar. One is not that much more common than the other. And then I was thinking, wait, maybe, am I wrong? Is it just me that I would use walk down and a lot of other people would use walk up? Perhaps that is the case, but we can look at it a little closer in depth because if you use walk up, it can also mean something that's a little different. So walk up can mean to walk to a person or place with a level of confidence, that you are feeling very confident, you have something you want to say, and you might walk right up to some person or you walk up to some place. Let me give you some examples. I could say, she walked up to her boss and said, I quit. All right. She walked up to her boss. She was very confident and really had something important to say. Another example would be, he walked up to her and asked her out on a date. Again, in that situation, you are walking to someone, but there really is a level of confidence that you have when you are going to this person or this place. So when I went back to Google Ngram Viewer, I was a little more specific with my phrase, and I put in walk down the street and walk up the street. And yes, in that case, you can see that walk down the street is more common than walk up the street. And this also applies to drive, if you want to say drive up or drive down. Perhaps you're looking for a grocery store and you ask somebody and they say, oh, it's just drive down the road and you'll see it in about 10 minutes. Or just drive up the road and you'll see it in 10 minutes. Again, they're interchangeable. They mean the same thing. You are driving to some place. But I think it also applies if somebody's going to be driving uphill, you could use drive up. If they're driving downhill, drive down. And if it's flat, either one. But But once again, I think drive down is going to be used more often in spoken English. Now let's look at these phrasal verbs, take off and lift off. So I could say the helicopter is taking off, or the helicopter is lifting off. Both of them are correct, and both of them kind of mean the same thing in this case. But these phrasal verbs do have a bit of a difference. So, for example, take off refers to an aircraft or a bird or an insect that leaves the ground and begins to fly. Liftoff refers to the action of some aircraft or spacecraft that is leaving the ground. And typically with liftoff, I kind of think of going straight up. You are going straight up from a particular point. So you could say that a rocket could lift off the ground. Or a helicopter could lift off the ground. A hot air balloon could lift off the ground. A drone could lift off the ground. So if we're talking about takeoff, I could use takeoff with all of those as well. I could say the rocket took off, the helicopter took off, the hot air balloon, it also took off, even the drone, it took off. Because I can use takeoff with all of those as well as many more, if we're talking about, well, like birds, insects, and planes, takeoff is used much more often than lift off. The reason why I think somebody would use lift off would be if they just want to be a little more specific and precise whenever they're speaking or perhaps writing, and they want to say that this aircraft is leaving the ground and it's kind of moving straight up. So you think of a rocket, a helicopter, a hot air balloon, a drone. Those are things that can lift off, but they could also take off as well. I hope that you have a little bit of a better understanding about the differences between these phrasal verbs, even though in certain instances they are interchangeable and you could use either one. You're doing great, so let's keep moving forward so that you can achieve your goal of understanding these confusing words, and then at the end of the lesson you can say mission accomplished, because it's finished. So let's switch gears, and I want to do a deep dive into two different phrases that are commonly confused. Used to and used to. And in doing so, we need to cover a little bit of grammar. Again, it's a nice day, so let's go back outside. Used to and used to. Now, they can be a little confusing, not necessarily when speaking, but when trying to determine, well, which one you should use in writing. And I say they're not really confused when speaking because the pronunciation is the same, and I will come back to that a little bit later on. But for right now, let's focus on used to, because this is definitely the most common one that you are going to use when speaking or writing. And I think, well, used to alone can be confusing because, well, dictionaries may look at it different ways. Cambridge has used to as a modal verb. Merriam-Webster says that used to is an adjective as well as a verb. Macmillan Dictionary has used to as a modal verb. Oxford Learner's Dictionary also says that used to is a modal verb, and dictionary.com has it as an adjective as well as a verb. Let's first make a distinction between used to as a modal verb or verb and used to as an adjective. Now, the grammar is different, the part of speech, but also the meaning is different. So right now, let's get rid of the adjective, forget about the adjective. Let's just focus on used to as a verb or modal verb. And I keep saying verb, modal verb, as you saw some of the dictionaries have it listed differently. And that is because in some ways, used to acts like a modal verb, and in other ways it really doesn't. But whether or not used to is considered a verb or a modal verb, the meaning's the same, and let's talk about the meaning because that is very important. And what this means is it's talking about something that was repeatedly done in the past, or even a situation that existed in the past, but the thing is not done anymore, or the situation does not exist anymore today in the present. So will give you some examples talking about myself. I could say, I used to live in South Korea. That is true. That is a situation that existed in the past. And when I lived in South Korea, I used to run around this lake twice a week. Bamun Lake, I used to run around it twice a week, and that is something that I had done repeatedly, except for the winter. In the winter, it was a bit too cold, so during those months, I used to sit on my ass. I could say that. Sometimes, not always. In those sentences, used to is a modal verb. It is a helping verb, and I already told you that it has some similarities to modal verbs, like it has one form, it's not conjugated. So I said, I used to live in South Korea. If I change the subject to he, it's not going to change. He used to live in South Korea. But used to, it can act differently from your average modal verb. For example, with modal verbs, you're not going to follow it with to. So I can say something like, I can swim, or it will rain, or you should write to me in the comments. I just love hearing from you. You should write to me in the comments. Now, with all of those sentences, we have the modal verb, and then we follow it with the infinitive, the base verb. There is no to. An exception is used to. I used to run around the lake, and well, even if I wanted to change the subject and talk about myself in the third person to show that the form is not going to change, I could say, in winter, Wes used to sit around on his ass, but sometimes. All right, so to is going to come before the base verb, and that's why I think if you're trying to think about it, I think it's best to consider used to as just one phrase. Try to think about it together as one phrase, used to. Questions and negative statements also make used to different from other modal verbs, because if we're talking about questions, typically we can just use the modal verb to create a question. Can he swim? Will it rain? And if we're talking about negative statements, then you're just going to use not with a typical modal verb. He cannot swim, or it won't rain. But this is not the case with used to. Of course, used to, it just has to be different than all the other modal verbs. And I think this is also when people might say, okay, it acts more like a verb, because if we're talking about questions, used to, it refers to the past. So with questions, you're going to use did, and if you're going to make a negative statement, then you're going to use did not. So if we're going to use it as a question, I could ask you, did you used to study English? And if I want to say a negative statement, then I could say, well, I didn't used to have hair like this. And that's because I used to shave my head. But more importantly than my shaved head is that you now see that used to has changed. The spelling has changed to used to. And this is what I want you to remember. If we're talking about questions and negative statements, you are going to use used to, and you're going to spell it U-S-E. I told you that the only distinction is in writing because, well, the pronunciation's the same. Whether you're saying used to or used to, it's the same pronunciation. The D and the T, they blend together to create one sound. So yeah, the pronunciation, it's really the same. Nobody's gonna know if you end up making a mistake, because you're still just going to say used to or used to. And now that you have a perfect understanding of used to being used as a modal verb / verb, let's now talk about used to being used as an adjective. So the first thing that I want to tell you is the meaning. I told you that the meaning is different, and what this means is that, well, it's referring to something that you are familiar with or that you are accustomed to. And it often follows the verb to be. So I could say, well, I am used to hot weather. All right, it's just something that I'm used to. I'm not used to cold weather. It's just something I'm not that familiar with. And in this case, because used to is an adjective, it's not going to change whether we're talking about questions or negative statements. You are always going to spell used to like this, U-S-E-D. Another thing that I want to tell you about used to as an adjective, just giving you another example, I do not think any of us were used to staying inside for so long during the pandemic. And I think that's true. I think we can all relate to that sentence. And the thing that I wanted to point out with this sentence is that you may often follow used to with a gerund, and you're used to doing something. Like, I'm used to taking the bus in the morning, or I'm not used to working late. But even though we were not used to staying inside during the pandemic, we had to get used to it. And I just gave you an example right there of it being used with another verb that is not the verb to be. And that, I think, is also, it's a common usage to get used to doing something, or even people using it as an imperative statement, giving a command and you're telling somebody, get used to it. But just remember, used to as an adjective has a different meaning than used to as a modal verb or verb. That's the one thing that I really want you to remember from this lesson. And yes, it's confusing, but I think over time, the more you listen, the more you practice, you're just going to get used to it. I just went into great detail about the differences between used to and used to. And the fact that these phrases are pronounced the same is another reason why they are confusing. They're homonyms. And I want to follow up on that right now and have a look at more homonyms, words that are pronounced the same. This vocabulary is especially confusing when it comes to spoken English. You really just need to put the words into context. Now, I'm sure that you're probably familiar with many of them, but I do think this is important for your pronunciation, as well as just understanding that there may be another word with a different meaning that has the same pronunciation. So let's begin. Listen carefully. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't? If you are confused right now, then that is because of homonyms, and I promise that by the end of this lesson, you will not be confused anymore. So let's talk about homonyms like these two words right here, flower and flower. So homonyms are words that are pronounced the same, or maybe they're spelled the same as another word, but they have a different meaning. And flower, you can hear that they are pronounced the same, but you can see that they are not spelled the same and they do not have the same meaning. All of the words that I'm going to teach you in this lesson are like this. To be exact, they are called homophones. But homophones, those are a type of homonym. I'm also giving you the phonetic spelling and the IPA so that you can actually see the pronunciation. I think that'll make it a little bit easier for you. And I'll tell you the different meanings as well. And if we're talking about this flower, well, then that is one that you might find in a garden or in a park. It has a very pleasant smell. And this other flower, well, that is referring to that fine powder that you might use for cooking, like if you're baking a cake. Then we have these two words right here, addition and addition. All right, good words to know. So the words have 3 syllables, and that first and third syllable, you can hear that schwa sound, that sound. The T-I-O-N is pronounced as shun, and the syllable stress comes before it on the second syllable, addition. If we're talking about this addition, well, then we're referring to adding numbers together, like in math. And this other addition would be talking about like a book or a newspaper or a magazine being published. And there might be different additions. Then we have click and click. So this first click, I think, is more common. It's the verb to click on something. Think about a computer. You might click on a link. I hope all of you click on that like button and show me a little bit of love. The next click, that Q-U-E, it has that K sound, but it's referring to a small, exclusive group of people. And what I would say is maybe think about like high school. That's how I think it's commonly used. Talking about young people, they have their exclusive group of friends, and you might refer to it as a clique. I don't think this word is often used to reference or talk about adults. Then we have these two homonyms right here, patience and patience. These words have 2 syllables. The stress is on that first syllable. And notice both words, they have that T-I-E, which is pronounced sh, with that schwa sound. Patience. And in this word, patience, the T is going to be silent. And this refers to, well, a person who is under medical care or getting some type of medical treatment. And this patience refers to the ability to wait and not be annoyed by something, especially if there is a delay. And you could say somebody has patience. Moose, and you guessed it, moose. All right, these words are homonyms, and you may be familiar with this moose, that large mammal that's part of the deer family. And this other moose is talking about that creamy and foamy dessert, and it's actually a French word because the dessert, it comes from France. And in French, it means like froth or foamy, which is what gives it its second meaning in English, because you could talk about mousse referring to a foamy substance that somebody could use for styling their hair. Like right now, I did not use any mousse. I did use a little bit of gel, but not mousse. The next set of homonyms, metal and metal. So both of these words, it's going to end with that dark L, that L, and you're not going to release it at the end. But these words are homonyms in American English, mostly because if we're talking about that T in metal, it's going to be a flap T, which is going to sound more like a soft D sound. And the reason that we're going to use a flap T is because it comes between two vowel sounds. So I'm from the United States, so I would pronounce it as metal, which then means it's a homonym with the verb, to metal. So metal, the noun, which is the one with the T, is talking about an element like gold or silver that is generally hard and strong. And metal, the verb, to meddle, it means that you are getting involved in a situation in which, you have not been asked to be involved and to share your opinion. And you could hear somebody talk about meddling in somebody else's business or meddling in someone else's personal affairs, to meddle. Then we have horse and horse. So this horse, very well known, the animal that people can ride around on. I don't know if you have ever ridden on a horse, but this next horse, this is a good word. Hopefully you're building your vocabulary. It allows you to be a little more specific because it's talking about the sound of a person's voice. So if somebody sounds hoarse, it means that their voice sounds a bit rough, possibly because they have a cold. So you could hear somebody inquire and say, hey, your voice, it sounds a little hoarse. Do you have a cold? Are you feeling okay? Then we have principle and principle. These two words, I think, are commonly confused. So hopefully we'll clear this up right now. Of course, both words sound the same. So they have 3 syllables. The stress is on the first syllable. That second and third syllable, you'll hear that schwa sound. Principle. Principle. So these words are confusing because they have multiple meanings. And I think this is especially important in your writing because, of course, you want to make sure that you are using the correct one. So if we're talking about this principle as a noun, it refers to a person who is the leader of a school. A school has a principal. If we're going to use this word as an adjective, well, then it just means that something that is very important. I could talk about the principal reason for doing something. If we're talking about this principle as a noun, it could refer to like a basis of conduct, and you say that someone has principles. Or it could be used to refer to like a set of rules that explain how we should do something or what's happening, that you want to follow these principles. Then we have gorilla and gorilla. These words have 3 syllables. That first and third syllable, you'll hear that schwa sound, and the stress is on the second syllable. Gorilla, gorilla. And this gorilla refers to that giant ape. Perhaps you have seen a gorilla at the zoo. And this other gorilla, it's a noun. It's talking about like a member of an unofficial military group. And the group of people together, you would say they are gorillas. The next set of homonyms, core and core. And I'm sure that one word you're thinking, what? Wait a second, that sounds nothing like the way it's spelled. Well, the reason for that, it's like you have that P and S. You don't even hear it. The other thing I would say about this word is that it is singular. You see that S, I think people might think that it is a plural noun, but it's singular. So let me explain why this is pronounced core. So the origin of this word, it comes from Latin, corpus, which means body. Now this word was borrowed from French, as well as the pronunciation core, which is why you don't hear the P and the S. So if we're talking about this core, it refers to the central part of something, like the Earth's core. And this core refers to a military organization, kind of like that body, that organization, that body, the Army Corps. Then we have sweet and sweet. I'm sure you may like this one word like I do. Sweet, it is talking about a flavor, something that's sugary. I really enjoy foods that are sweet. And this other sweet, that S-U-I, it is pronounced like sweet, and that is because it's another word that's been borrowed from French, and it refers to a set of connected rooms, like that you might find at a hotel suite. Then we have these three words, C's, C's, and C's, okay? You have that long E, and it ends with that Z sound. So C's, well, this is just talking about like the ocean. This sees, the verb, to look at something, and really talking about it in the third person, like he sees or she sees. And then this other verb, to seize something, means to grab a hold of it suddenly. Okay, so now that you have a much better understanding of homonyms, let's go back to that riddle I told you at the beginning of the lesson. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't? Think about which word is a homonym. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. Okay? The word 8 is a homonym. We could be talking about, well, the number 8, or the verb to eat in the past tense, which is 8. And that was the word I was saying all along. There are 30 cows in a field and 28 chickens. How many didn't? The answer, of course, is 10. I know you're probably thinking, well, wait a second, cows don't eat chickens. Of course they don't. It's just a riddle. But it's a fun little way to introduce and talk about homonyms. Let's now turn our attention back to grammar, because often when I hear people make speaking mistakes, it's because of prepositions. And some very common and confusing prepositions are in, on, at. So let's have a look at when to use and how to use these useful prepositions when it comes to talking about place. And once you understand this, there will be no more confusion. Which preposition should we use to complete this sentence? In, on, or at? Actually, you could use any of them. All of them are correct. It really just depends on the context. And that's what I want to do in today's lesson. I want to break it down for you so that you easily understand how to use each of these prepositions when talking about place. And I'm also going to give you a little bit of a mini quiz at the end to see how much you've learned. So let's begin with in. And when you're thinking about in, think about an enclosed space that you are surrounded on all sides. And I want to give you some, well, general ideas as to when you would use this preposition. So you will use in to talk about locations within a larger area. How many people live in this town? You'll use in with a car, taxi, or van. If I were to say, hey, we're waiting in the car. It's used to talk about workplaces or industries. If someone asks, where do you work? I work in human resources, or I work in fashion. And if you've seen many of my video lessons, you know I absolutely do not work in fashion. My fashion's pretty bad. You would use in with water. Let's all get in the pool, or the expression, there's plenty of fish in the sea. So again, we're talking about the sea, we're talking about water, and you would use this expression to say that, well, if somebody's single and they're looking to have a relationship and find a partner, you're saying this to encourage them to keep looking, that there's somebody out there for them. Don't give up hope. There's plenty of fish in the sea. We use this preposition with class. I'm having trouble paying attention in class. I'm enclosed in this space. And we also use it with printed materials. If you don't know the meaning of a word, you can look it up in the dictionary. And you can think about it that, well, that word, it's surrounded by other pages, so it's in the dictionary. So just keep these in mind when you're thinking about in. And now let's talk about on, and when you will use this preposition. And when it comes to on, I want you to think about a surface, that something is attached to or touching something else. So we use on to refer to the position of something on any surface. Your coffee is on the table. I found some money on the sidewalk. It's used to talk about a floor in a building. I work on the 7th floor. It also describes the position along a road or river or by the sea or a lake. I could say the car is on the road. The boat is on the river. Again, it's on that surface. Or I could even say I grew up on the East Coast. So I'm talking about the coast where I grew up on that surface, and I would say on the East Coast. So when you're talking about the coast, east, west, use on. Now the next few are technically not on the surface, but I still want you to use on. So we're going to use it when talking about being on public transit, like a bus or a plane. I'm on a bus heading downtown, or I'm on a plane to Chicago. And I know this can be a little tricky because we use in with a car, like you're surrounded, you're enclosed. So one way to think about it is that you're going to use in with smaller vehicles, and you'll use on with larger modes of transportation. But again, there's always exceptions because you're still going to use on with a bike or motorcycle, on a bike or on a motorcycle. We use the preposition on with left or right. My house is on the left. Oh, no, sorry, it's on the right. And we'll use this preposition with media as well. Did you see the new show on Netflix? Or you may be watching this lesson on YouTube. So just keep all of this in mind when it comes to using on. So now let's talk about at and when to use this preposition. And when you think about at, I want you to think of a point, a specific location or position. So of course we're going to use at when we're referring to the position or location as a point. I could say there's a package at the front door. We use it to refer to an address. I live at 44 Main Street. And this can be a little confusing because if we're just talking about the street, then we'll use on. I live on Main Street, on that surface. But if I give the specific location, 44 Main Street, well, now we're talking about a point, so we're going to use at. We use this preposition to refer to most shops or public places. And in this case, I want you to think about a larger point. So I could say I'm shopping at the mall. And you would use at even if you are in the mall, because if somebody were to ask you like, hey, where are you? They're typically asking about your location. So that's why you would use at and say, I'm shopping at the mall. We use it to refer to group activities. I could ask you, how many people were at your party? We also use it with school or university. I studied at a top-notch university. And that's not really true. I studied at a party school, but you get the point. With either of those, we're going to use at. And we use this preposition with work or home. I could really say that right now I'm working at home. So this should give you a better idea as to when you would use at. Now let's go back to our original sentence, and I told you that all three prepositions are correct. It really just depends on the context. So if I say I'm in the lake, well, that just means that I'm physically in the water. I'm surrounded by the water. If I were to say I'm on the lake, well, now I'm talking about the surface. So it really implies that I'm probably on a boat and I'm out on the water and I'm on the lake. And if I were to say I'm at the lake, well, now I'm talking about a specific location. Even though it's a larger area, if somebody were to ask, where are you? Then I would say I'm at the lake, because we're talking about location. And right now, I want to test your knowledge. I have a little mini quiz for you. I'm going to give you a sentence, and I want you to think, well, which preposition best completes it? In, on, or at? I'll give you a moment to think about it, and then I'll tell you the answer. So your first sentence is, I found a mistake, the first page. Which preposition would you use? The answer is on. So in this case, we're talking about the surface of the page, on the first page. I found a mistake on the first page. So just keep this in mind. If we're talking about a page, we're going to use on. And that is a little tricky because remember, we're going to use in when talking about printed materials like a book. So something is on a page, but in a book. Here's your next sentence. She felt proud, the end of her month-long journey. What do you think? The correct answer is at. She felt proud at the end of her month-long journey because we're talking about that point, that location. She's at the end of her journey. And these are really common phrases with at if we're talking about, well, at the beginning of something or at the end of something. Then there's this sentence, there are no public toilets, the city center. The correct answer is in. There are no public toilets in the city center. We're going to use in because we're talking about a location within a larger area. Here's a question for you. Do you have anything? Your pockets. I think you know this. The correct answer is in. Do you have anything in your pockets? We're talking about an enclosed area. Here's another one. We wanted to sit the front of the plane. I'm trying to trick you a little bit, but the correct answer is at. We wanted to sit at the front of the plane. I told you that with public transit, you're going to use on a plane, but in this case, we're talking about a specific location on a plane. So in that case, we're going to use at the front of the plane. How about this one? Please refer to the graph, the slide. The correct answer is on. Please refer to the graph on the slide. So once again, we're talking about the surface of something on a page, on a slide. So how'd you do on the quiz? I want you to be honest. Let me know down in the comments because I just love hearing from you. It's always good to get a little grammar and cover a variety of topics because there are many reasons why someone may find English confusing. Throughout the lesson, we've talked about vocabulary, grammar, pronunciation with those homonyms, and I want to go back to vocabulary and do another deep dive and really have a look at the differences between some very common verbs, ones that you should know, and I'm sure you use them all the time. I'm talking about the verbs say and tell. I'm going to tell you a secret. Well, it's not really a secret, but you should listen carefully to what I'm about to say, because I'm going to tell you the difference between these two words. And these two words confuse English learners mostly because their meaning is pretty similar. So let's get right to it. First, let's look at the verb say. Now, we use this verb when we want to say something to someone. Now, we don't necessarily have to identify the person or people that we are saying something to, but we're just saying something in general, and that something might be general information. The weather report says it's going to rain today. In this example, the weather report is saying something. We don't really know specifically who they're saying it to, but they're just saying it in general. Another example is that you might be saying your opinion about something. The kids said Wes' teacher is crazy. Or perhaps you're reading what the instructions say.
Instructions say if we finish the game, it'll all go away.
So in each of these examples, we were saying something to someone. Now, this is different from the verb tell, which is when we tell someone something. In this case, we usually identify the person or people that we are talking to, which is why tell is often followed by a direct object. Take a look at these examples. Ioana told Wes to take out the garbage. In this example, Ioana is telling Wes, she's telling me something. She's telling me to take out the garbage.
Wes, can you please take out the trash?
Yeah, I'll do it. We tell our students to join our social media classes. This, of course, is something that we tell you all the time. we tell you to join our social media classes. So join them. Here are a few more examples using tell. And keep in mind the object that follows the verb. She told me to sit in this chair. The teacher tells us to do our homework. My mom told me to take a bath. I told you not to wake me up. Now keep in mind that there are a few exceptions when it comes to using tell. I know, English and all the exceptions, it sucks. But you don't always have to tell someone. Sometimes you can just tell something. For example, you can tell a secret. You can tell a lie. You can tell the truth. You can tell a joke. And you can also tell a story. These are several exceptions when it comes to using tell. And you just have to memorize them, use them, and you will eventually remember them. I'm telling you the truth. Okay, let's practice what we've learned. And this is a listening comprehension activity. I am going to tell you a sentence, and that sentence is missing a word, which is either say or tell. After listening to each sentence, I want you to say your answers out loud. You'll be saying this to me, and I'm going to be listening. I'll give you a moment to say your answer, and then after, I will tell you the correct answer. So let's begin. I don't want you to any more lies. I don't want you to any more lies. The answer is tell. This is one of those exceptions. You tell a lie. I don't want you to tell any more lies. I can't hear you. Can you please say your answer again? I want you to say your answer. I can't hear you. Could you please say your answer again? I want you to say your answer. The answer is say, because I want you to say something, which is the answer. I want you to say your answer out loud. That was so rude. I can't believe he didn't say hello. That was so rude. I can't believe he didn't say hello. The answer is say, because we were talking about something that the person didn't say. I can't believe he didn't say hello. I can't remember. What did you tell me I should do? I can't remember. What did you tell me I should do? The answer is tell, because we're talking about telling someone something. What did you tell me I should do? Perhaps it's a little easy when I do the activity. Now, let's see if you can listen for these words when other people say them.
Be careful what you Be careful what you Be careful what you say.
Now tell the truth. Now tell the truth. Now tell the truth.
Just the first thing that pops into your mind. Just the first thing that pops into your mind. Just say the first thing that pops into your mind.
Don't his name. Don't his name. Don't say his name.
And what did you tell her? And what did you tell her? And what did you tell her?
Something I'm giving up on you. Something I'm giving up on you. Say something I'm giving up on you.
I know that we have covered a lot this past hour, and I hope that I have cleared up some confusion. If I have succeeded, you can let me know by hitting that like button. As always, thank you so much for watching, and I will see you next time. So long.